Hello, I'm Stacey Fisher with Senior Resource Connectors, and I'm talking today with Krystal Wilkinson from Adultcare Assistance. Good morning. Well, hello. How are you?
I'm good, Stacey. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. I want to ask you, Adult Care Assistance has been in the Valley and in Tucson for how many years now, Krystal?
It's been 29 years. Next year, we will be celebrating 30 years.
You
Yes.
are truly a leader in our industry.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
Yes.
that.
No, you are. I can't think of anyone better to answer this question. It's one that we get most calls for at Senior Resource Connectors. Why should I go through an agency that's sometimes more expensive than hiring my own caregiver, my neighbor, my friend, someone that I find in a registry? Can you start us off with that really basic question to help people with their search?
You're calling it a basic question, but it's loaded, right?
Loaded. Yes.
It's a loaded question. Yeah. So, there's nothing, I'm not going to speak against those who really truly care for others and they want to help out and you found them through church and they're a family friend or what have you. I don't want to speak against them because some of those are really good caregivers. But one thing I think that is really important for everybody to really keep in mind is the risk and the liability, both on the person who's providing the care, the caregiver themselves, as well as the family or the client who's receiving the care. So just so you know, in the state of Arizona, there is really no regulation whatsoever overseeing home care in general. So that means that anybody and their friend can provide care to your loved one. And the problem is that there, with being no regulation, means that there's nobody checking to see if that person is safe. And so as a family member, if you're hiring somebody who is privately through maybe a Craigslist ad or a friend of a friend or somebody in your neighborhood or church, something like that, you have to make sure that you're protecting yourself, your estate, and the person who's providing that care. And so one misconception is that if they were to get hurt on my property, if they're caring for my dad, let's say, and they fall and they trip and they break their femur, and it's a bad break. So they have to go to the hospital. They're in the hospital for a week. It's going to take several weeks to rehab and recover from that, and they're not able to work. Your homeowner's insurance, first of all, is not going to cover that because they were a paid employee in that home, first of all. Second of all, unless you have been paying their employment taxes, nobody is going to be paying into their unemployment tax. And so therefore, they're not going to be able to go and receive unemployment during that time that they're unable to work. So that person is also not going to be receiving a paycheck during that time. So that caregiver, in a sense, is kind of put in a bad place because who's going to pay for the medical bills and who's going to pay for the time off work because they're not going to be able to provide any kind of work for themselves and pay their bills during that time. So then often the family member is looked at as what we call the accidental employer. So the person who has hired them is the person who's ultimately responsible for paying both the federal and state income taxes on the employer side of it, as well as paying for that unemployment insurance. And then if there's any kind of injury, they would be responsible to cover that injury for that person. So that's one reason why, if you want to choose to go with somebody who's private, it might be cheaper, but there's a lot of risk involved in that because of the fact that there's nobody protecting that. Now, utilizing an agency who uses W-2 employees, not somebody who uses a 1099, but somebody who uses W-2 employees, you're typically going to find that we do have workman's comp. It's a requirement of us. If you have a W-2 employee, you do have to have that workman's comp insurance in place, and that would help cover any kind of injury, right? Also, we are going to their W-2. We are going to be paying already those employment taxes. So you don't have to worry about getting that EIN number and, filing that extra tax thing. And if you don't file it, then looking at the additional taxes and things like that if you don't file it. And so that is another way that we're protecting them. In addition to that, you would be responsible if you're hiring them privately. What kind of a background are you looking at? How are you going to screen them on that? Are you just going by your friend's recommendation or meeting them and they seem nice? We're going to take it a few steps beyond that. For adult care assistance, we actually require that all of our employees have a fingerprint clearance card. And not only do we have that fingerprint clearance card, but we run it to verify that it's valid. Just recently, we had an applicant, somebody who applied for a job, bring us in. She sent over her fingerprint clearance card and something looked a little off. And my HR director dug a little bit deeper and found that it was that the number, she went to run the number. It takes 2 seconds to run it through the state registry to see if there's anything, if it's not valid, if it says pending or anything else, we can't move forward with employment. And it just said that the number didn't exist. And so she started looking a little bit further into it and found out that the driver's license she gave us name didn't match 100%. That was spelled differently than the fingerprint clearance card. Once we finally did a full background, we were able to go through all the right channels and get the right information on the right person. She had brought us her actual driver's license for her I-9 documents. We actually found that she had quite a history of elder abuse in her background. We did not move forward with that person. So it's one thing to ask if you have a fingerprint clearance card. It's another thing to actually run it to verify that that card is correct. And when we first reached back out to this applicant and said, we cannot move forward, she goes, I can get you another one. Just give me a minute. I'll get you. So she was just basically saying, there's a whole black market out there. I could get another one. If that one didn't work, I'll find you one. That's not what we're about. So it's very important that you are really checking into the person that you're bringing into your home. A lot of times there's not a whole lot of oversight. So we want to make sure that our loved ones are safe. So, hiring an agency, we're going to take those additional steps to try to ensure to the best of our ability that the person that you're having come into your home is actually who who you think it is, and that, they don't have any criminal history, as well as we're going to have that oversight and that training to help guide that. So yeah, all of that does cost a little bit more money, but we're taking on all those additional risks that you don't have to worry about that as the person who's receiving the care through somebody who you've hired outside. So again, we're protecting both the caregiver who's providing the care to make sure that she has everything she needs, but we're also, trying to protect those families.
Well, and it's so important. And I hope people listen, and there is no amount of dollars that peace of mind doesn't cover when you do go
Right.
through an agency like yours that's vetted employees, and you can't put a dollar figure on peace of mind because it's just too important. Krystal, I know most seniors want to stay at home safely for as long as possible. And
Right.
so kind of give me an example of some of the duties that an in-home caregiver can perform why they come into a home to help that safety factor.
Sure. Yeah. Every agency out there, if you run into the home care, we're going to be providing those custodial type duties for the most part. So, the most common, you've probably all seen the commercials on TV or whatever, is going to be the bathing, the dressing, the meal preparation, light housekeeping, transferring assistants, getting them from sitting to standing position, helping with, transportation to doctor's appointments, things like that. But I like to talk to the companion care side of it.
All
I think
important.
the most important thing our caregivers do is provide that companionship. And, our seniors, as we get older, we often become very isolated in our homes because we're not able to get out as much, right?
Absolutely.
And we all lived, I'm going to say it, you're going to hate me because I'm going to use the C word, but we all lived through COVID, right?
Right.
And we remember how isolating and how that felt when, yeah, maybe their daughter's calling, 2 or 3 times a week. Maybe they speak daily, but the daughter lives in Connecticut. And, that phone call means the world to you. But there's just something to be said for being face to face in that conversation and how that interaction is, and that validating point of just being there and spending time together. And so the most important thing that I think our caregivers do is actually provide that companionship, as well as the oversight. For adult care assistance, we have case aides that come into the home on a regular basis that's helping oversee the client and the caregiver experience. And they're making sure that those caregivers have training that is appropriate to that specific person that they're caring for. So it's specific training to like your mom and your dad's needs versus just it's an overall, just basic training that we received, that was required by the state or whatever. We're actually trying to make sure that we are, adhering to the care plan and providing the care that's specific to your loved one, whether it's how they like their coffee made, or maybe they have a catheter or something like that, or something that's really specific to them that's unusual. And then we also have care managers who are overseeing the entire care of the clients. So they're going to be helping make sure that we're coming in to evaluate for safety. We're coming in to also make sure that if there's additional resources that are needing to be addressed, like maybe they have found a pressure sore because our loved one is spending a lot of time sitting in their chair. So how are we going to address that new wound that's coming up? So maybe we need to bring in home health, or maybe it's, they're not doing as well and we're starting to see a rapid decline. So maybe bringing hospice in for evaluation to see if hospice might be appropriate. So we can make those connections with each of the different services that may be needed in that home. So those are just a lot of different ways where you have that peace of mind. And, if you are a family member who lives out of state, being able to know that somebody else has got their eyes on mom and dad
Wow.
and will alert you if there's a need or an issue, you know?
Well, again, and then there's that peace of mind again, that you get when there are additional eyes. When people are looking, when they call your office, what are some of the key factors on what would be a trigger for a family? I guess I'm not asking this right. What would be like some of the reasons a family would ask, do my parents need companionship? Do my parents need a little bit of in-home care? Do you answer those questions? Do you say these 5 things? Or, I know everybody's unique. You just said that, but
Mhm.
do you have like a list of things that people call your agency and ask specifically?
So everybody, like you said, is very, very different. Whenever we get we call it an inquiry call, when somebody's calling just for some information, we try to find out as much as possible as to what triggered this phone call. And typically there's something, sometimes it's just an underlying, I'm just trying to get information for the future. And my hat is off to them. If you're planning that far ahead, kudos to you, because most of us don't. When my husband got sick, I had no plan in place. I had no idea what to do when suddenly he went from being an avid runner to I need help getting out of bed to go to the bathroom. It was quite dramatic. We had
Right.
no plan in place. So, sometimes it's just, gathering information, but most often we're seeing that maybe there was a fall, or maybe we're starting to see some behaviors with mom and dad where they're getting overly forgetful. And I'm really worried they couldn't find their way home from the grocery store last week, or there's some kind of an event that has happened. So we try to learn as much as we can. And sometimes it's just the peace of mind. Years ago, I can remember so well, we had this daughter. She was the primary caregiver for her parents, and they lived over in Sun City. And she would come in from, I think, Surprise to come and visit mom and dad 2 or 3 times a week just to check on them, make sure they had food in the refrigerator, cook them a couple meals and things. And dad was managing his wife's care pretty well, but his wife had dementia. And the daughter was still fairly young. And so she and the kids all went off to California for a vacation. And it just so happened they just got out of town, and dad had a cardiac episode and ended up having to call 911. He was rushed to the hospital, and the paramedics contacted his daughter saying, we have to take your father to the hospital. This looks really serious. However, your mom has dementia. We can't leave her home alone. Is there somebody who can come over? So the daughter called us at about 1 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, listen, I can't get back for 6 hours. We drove out here. Even if I get a flight, I'm probably 6 hours out. I don't know what to do. My mom is home alone. They can't take her to the hospital. She has dementia. And so because we were, already in place, she had already contacted us just for some information and things. We were able to act really quickly, and we got a caregiver over that evening, and we had provided some respite care a couple other times. And so it was somebody that her mom was actually familiar with. So sometimes it's just having that peace of mind, knowing I have somebody to help me when I need it, or maybe even navigating what else do I need. We have people that we don't ever even serve that sometimes they just call our agency, just be like, here's what's going on with mom or dad. And maybe they actually need somebody to just help them. We had somebody who needed to go to the airport. They were going to try to fly their mom to California, and they were coming through Phoenix International Airport one time, and they needed a caregiver to help, dad take his medication and help change his brief, his Depends or whatever at the airport. And they wanted to know if we had a caregiver. We were able to find somebody to help with that. We weren't able to help with that, but we found a flight nurse who was able to go past security, spend the 4 hours during his layover at Phoenix International, got him on the next plane. All was good. So we can help find those resources as well.
Well, that's wonderful. And you brought up a good point in your last statement, because spouses can use your services too for just a little respite, just because so many times those well spouses have the medical need before the person they're taking care of, just because they are elderly, they do have a cardiac issue, they do have a stroke, and the one that they've been caring for is left. So it's so important for them. And when I mean respite, I know you know what it means, but for those people out there maybe listening right now, you can really help give that that caregiving spouse a peace of mind by coming into the home daily, 3 times a week, and letting them go do what they needed to do for their own peace of mind.
Sure. Or their own health. I mean, when I was my husband's caregiver, the last thing I did was go to the doctor for myself, right?
Right.
I didn't get my hair cut. My hair got so long. I mean, you tend to give all of yourself in those moments because they need you, right? And we don't take
Right.
care of ourselves. And we have both, being in this industry, have seen it one too many times where the caregiving spouse is the one who often passes away before the person who's receiving the care because it's so hard. It is stressful. It's overwhelming. And then we tend not to take care of ourselves. And so it can become dangerous for us as well. So providing that respite, just a little bit of time, maybe it's to go out with a girlfriend and sit down and have a cup of coffee. Right.
Right.
Or for a gentleman, maybe it's playing, a round of golf with your buddies, just doing something that's normal when life is
Yeah.
no longer the normal that you used to have. And so somehow that's just healing, or it might be getting yourself to that doctor's appointment that you should have made 6 months ago and not ignoring, the signs and symptoms of something that is laying in wait to come and become ugly on you.
Right.
So,
No. And
you know,
sadly, a lot of times in our industry, we've seen where we're called in the middle of a crisis and not, the pre-planning. I wish we
right.
all pre-planned a little better, but we don't. I know Scott and I wouldn't have it if something happened to either of us, we would be like, I don't know, I'm not sure what to do. So, yes. So, do you have a favorite story on where adult care assistants, you touch so many lives in almost 30 years now, you've had to have so many people that you've helped, but is there one that really stands out and you're like, this is why I do this?
There's so many stories, and I love if you give me, how much time do we have? I do have one story that I think it really resonated with me because of my own background with my grandfather was 103 when he passed away. And I can remember as a little girl, we would dance and he had a bum leg and he would take me, he had this little area and we would dance together. And I just remember that was just such a special thing, that we did together. But we had a family that it was 2 daughters caring for their mother, and the mother had dementia, but she also had COPD. So she was on oxygen, and she was actually at a point where she was really not verbal anymore. And the 2 daughters were just killing themselves trying to take care of her. And you could tell that they absolutely loved her, but mom was becoming more and more defiant, didn't want to bathe, didn't want to be toileted. And she had all these medical issues and things. So one daughter still worked. She was still young enough that she had a full-time job. And so she would stay up all night long and try to sleep with one eye open in case mom needed her during the night to give her sister a break. And then her sister, who was sleeping during the night, who didn't have a job, was able to stay and just work her tail off trying to take care of mom during the day. And the 2 girls were just at their wits' end. And I remember meeting with them during the initial meeting in the assessment, and they were just like, I hate it. I don't even like my mom anymore. This is, it's just, it has ruined everything for us. We had a caregiver that came in, and over time I continued coming to visit the family and everything. And every time I'd go over to that house, the caregiver, was coming in and she was providing all of the assistance with, bathing, dressing, all of those things. But every time we went in, we noticed that there was music playing in the house. There was always big band music. And so the woman finally passed away after, I think she was on services for about 1.5 years with us. And she finally did pass away. And about a week after she passed away, one of the daughters called me and she said, I just want to share with you how much it meant to us to have your caregiver taking care of our mother. And she said, we realized immediately the relief having her come in and just be, the caregiver in there helping us. And we were still there. Both daughters continued with their schedule, but the one who was trying to sleep and help during the night, she slept a little better because she was able to know that somebody else was helping. And the other daughter throughout the day got a break once in a while to maybe, go to the bathroom, whatever. Right. As you know, my mom passed away a couple of weeks ago, and I was just scrolling through my phone and I just had to tell you what I found. She said, one day I was in the back and I was working on something in the back, and your caregiver was in the kitchen. My mom was sitting in her favorite recliner, and your caregiver was in the kitchen making lunch. And she said, apparently she noticed that my mom's foot was starting to tap to the beat of the music. And she went over to my mother and she said, Betty, do you want to dance? And Betty indicated that yes, she did. And she said, now my mother hadn't been verbal for some time now, but she said, yeah. And so next thing you know, she goes, your caregiver is yelling, Amanda, get in here, hurry up. And so I came running in and she said, your mom wants to dance. She said, I told her there's no way my mother wants to dance. She said, no, look at her foot. She wants to dance. And she looked at my mother and she said, "Do you want to dance?" And she said, just as plain as day, "Yes, I do." So she said, "Next thing I know, your caregiver helped my mom and helped me get my mother out of her chair." So we rearranged all those oxygen cords and things. Next thing I know, she said, "I am holding her in my arms and we're swaying back and forth to the music." And she started to giggle. And then she threw her head back into a very nice little dip that I gave her. And she said, it was just this beautiful moment. And she said that afternoon, my mom slipped into a coma and she passed away the next morning. But she said, I was just scrolling through my phone and the caregiver had somehow picked up my phone and hit the camera button on it and videotaped the whole thing. And she
Oh,
said, it is just beyond the caregiving. It's the way that you care. And I just think that's a beautiful story. And it really speaks to the heart of the caregiver and what that caregiver can do. When we come into that home, it's not just about the task list of things that need to be done. It's about the relationship we have with that person and being able to give those daughters and those sons back, to their mother, back to them or whatever. And she said, you gave me my mommy back that day. I got to have her last dance. I just love that story. So that's
story.
Thank
Beautiful
you.
story. Brings me to tears. Well, if people are looking for you, Krystal, like I said, you're up here in the valley, you're in on the west side of town. You have a new office in Scottsdale, and you're also down in the Tucson area. How do
Yes.
people reach out to adult care assistance?
They can find us on our website, which is adultcareassistance.com. There's a lot of great information there. Even if you're just looking for more information about home care, there's some services that we try to put on that are free services. Not that we provide free home care, but there's a lot of free things like different support groups, depending upon what you're going through, things like that. And just information about us and some great information just about caring for your loved one on that website. So that's a great way to start, or you can give us a call. And I can give you the two phone numbers for the Phoenix Scottsdale area. It's the 623-977-2223, and Tucson is 520-575-8000. So we'd love to help any way we can.
Well, you have been in business for almost 30 years, and you are not able to stay in business in our world if you don't do it with the heart and you don't do it with the kindness and that you do and the diligence. So thank you for everything that you do.
No, thank you so much. And thanks for asking me to be on your podcast. I think this is exciting. And I appreciate you allowing me to share a little bit about what we've learned over the last 30 years, right?
I love that. Yes, we can all share stories, but thank you so much, Krystal.
Thank you, Stacey. Appreciate it.